Which is better, the OnePlus Nord N30 5G or the OnePlus Nord N20 5G? Well, in this video, we're going to find out. What's going on, everyone? This is Kevin here, coming at you with a comparison of the OnePlus Nord N30 5G versus its predecessor, the OnePlus Nord N20 5G. Now, I would like to thank OnePlus for being kind enough for sending me the Nord N30, and all opinions expressed in this video, of course, are completely my own. Now, from going from one generation to the next, there are quite a few changes, but at the same time, these two phones are also very similar. Now, I am looking forward to showing you everything there is to know about them here in this video. Now, the first thing that I want to compare with these two devices are the displays. Now, with the Nord N30 5G, we do have a larger display here compared to the Nord N20 at 6.72 inches versus 6.43 inches. But even with this display being smaller with the N20, it's still a very big phone. Another difference that you've probably noticed too is the placement of the hole punch for the front-facing camera. So with the Nord N30, it is centered compared to it being situated in the upper left with the Nord N20. And then another difference is the actual display technology that's being used here. Now with the Nord N30, we do have an IPS LCD display running at 120 Hz refresh rate compared to an AMOLED display running at 60 Hz. Now typically, I would say that AMOLED displays are better than IPS LCD displays, but it does seem like the IPS LCD display here on the Nord N30 is actually almost a bit brighter compared to the N20. I do have brightness set to 100% on both phones, and I really do find things being impressive here with the N30. And then beyond that, having the faster refresh rate at 120 Hz is way more premium than the 60 Hz refresh rate with the predecessor model. This phone almost feels a little bit laggy and kind of choppy in comparison to the Nord N30. Now you can see side by side, the Nord N30 is of course the larger phone of the two, but even though the display technically is a lot bigger, for some reason, the overall footprint of the phone isn't necessarily that much larger. Now, both displays are 1080p. We are getting a slightly higher PPI with the Nord N20 because it is a smaller display, so the PPI here is 409 versus 391 with the Nord N30, and then both phones do feature 20:9 aspect ratios. Another thing both phones have in common are the front-facing cameras being 16 megapixels, and then both phones do feature 128 gigs of storage along with microSD card expansion. Now, unfortunately, neither of these two devices feature wireless charging, but they do both have fingerprint sensors. However, the implementation of that is different. So on the Nord N30, the fingerprint sensor is built into the power button. So I'll try that right now. There we go, very quick. Let's try that one more time. Whereas with the Nord N20, the fingerprint sensor is built into the display. Now that typically is considered to be a more premium implementation compared to it being on the power button, but when it comes to regular day-to-day usability of these two devices, I feel like both do work really well. It's not like having the fingerprint sensor being on the power button on the Nord N30 is some sort of major inconvenience in comparison to it being built into the display. I feel like probably the best part about the in-display fingerprint sensor in the Nord N20 is just that it feels a lot more futuristic. Now both phones do feature face unlock, which I do appreciate. That's always a great feature, and it is nice having an alternative from the fingerprint sensor. Now when it comes to the main cameras on these devices, there are some similarities and also some differences. So the similarities is that both phones do feature 2 megapixel depth sensing cameras and 2 megapixel macro cameras, and then also both phones do have 1080p video recording, but with the main camera on the Nord N30, it is 108 megapixels compared to 64 megapixels with the Nord N20. Now the biggest benefit of this higher megapixel count with the Nord N30 is that if you want to zoom in digitally, that does work a bit better because the higher the megapixels, technically the more clear the photos are when you crop in. Now here's how things look on the camera apps on both devices. This is with the main rear camera right now. So I'm going to start by taking a photo of this plant with the Nord N20, and then I'll take the same photo with the Nord N30. There we go. Let's pull those up and see how they look. And you can see here that, in many ways they are similar, and it's hard to tell just looking at the two side by side which one's better. I feel like it's almost a bit of a tie, but I will say the Nord N20 certainly does a nice job at capturing images. And then flipping around to the front-facing cameras, let's try that right now. So there we go with the N20 and N30, and we'll pull these up. And I actually feel like with these two examples, the Nord N20 does do the better job of the two. You can see that I'm a lot clearer here with the N20 compared to the N30. So that actually is pretty interesting. Now with the Nord N30, we are getting more RAM with 8 gigs of RAM compared to 6 gigabytes of RAM with the predecessor. However, what's interesting is going from one generation to the next, we're actually getting the same exact processor. So both phones feature the Qualcomm Snapdragon 695 5G. Now overall, that's a good processor. However, it would have been nice to see with the newer generation that we'd be getting the next generation processor. So one of the latest processors in Snapdragon 600 series is the Snapdragon 6 Gen 1. So that processor is starting to be rolled out on various devices in kind of the same mid-range. And I think that would have been a great processor to have in this phone. But instead, we're getting the same processor from last year. Now, fortunately, with the 695 5G, that processor is very capable. So I think for most people, this really won't be a huge deal one way or the other. But at the same time, it is always nice to see from one generation to the next some sort of improvement when it comes to the processor. And then I did run a benchmark test with Geekbench 6. And you can see here the scores. So a slightly better score here with the Nord N30, but essentially the scores are pretty much the same. So I would say that if you currently have a OnePlus Nord N20 5G and you're thinking about getting the N30, pretty much expect to get the same performance. Now you might have noticed that we are getting Android 12 with the N20 compared to Android 13 with the N30. And unfortunately, there is no Android 13 update available for the N20. Now, there have been some innovations when it comes to the battery that we're getting with the Nord N30. So with this device, we are getting a 5,000 milliamp hour internal battery, which is upgraded from the 4,500 milliamp hour battery with the N20. And then also fast charging is increased from 33 watts to 50 watts. So it's really cool that you can recharge the OnePlus Nord N30 5G so quickly. Now both phones do have NFC, which is great. I'm a big fan of that. I always use that feature with any phone that does support it. And then another addition to the N30 is that we are getting stereo audio. So there's no stereo audio, unfortunately, with the N20. And what I mean by stereo audio is that when you're watching a video or listening to music, for example, you're getting audio out of both the main speaker on the bottom of the phone and then also the earpiece. And as a result of that, you're getting very high quality immersive sound. It's a lot clearer, a lot richer in general. So I'm really glad that OnePlus decided to do that here with the Nord N30. And then comparing the hardware of the two phones, I already talked quite a bit about the front panels here. So we do have a different placement for the front-facing camera. I don't think one is necessarily better than the other, it's just different. But then the materials are a lot different. So let me just start off and say, I'm not a big fan of having a glossy back for very obvious reasons. You can see here, there's fingerprints all over the phone. So I really wish we had a matte finish like we had with the Nord N20. I think this material looks fantastic, and I don't know why they decided to kind of take a step back here with the N30. Now, both of these phones are made of plastic, so I do recommend pairing them up with some sort of case to keep them protected. So if you're gonna do that, then I suppose the material itself doesn't matter a ton, but still, I feel like it is a downgrade here with the N30. And then the camera modules are kind of different and also kind of similar. We do have a larger flash with the N30, and then you can see that even though it looks like we have dual cameras with the N30, we actually have two camera lenses within the second circle down there. Now taking a look at the left side of the two devices, pretty much an identical setup with volume up, volume down, and then the slot for the micro SD card and SIM card. Then on the right side, both phones have the power button, but with the Nord N30, the power button is the fingerprint sensor as well. And then up top here, we do have the noise canceling microphones. And then on the bottom of the two devices, we have the 3.5mm headphone jack, microphone, USB-C port for charging and data transfer, and the speaker. So in conclusion, the OnePlus Nord N30 5G is an upgrade in some ways compared to the OnePlus Nord N20 5G, but in other ways it is a downgrade. So for example, the material in the back, I personally think it's a downgrade because it doesn't look nearly as good. And then another downgrade is that we're going from an AMOLED display to IPS LCD. And then another downgrade as well is that we're going from an in-display fingerprint sensor to a fingerprint sensor on the power button. And then also having the same processor from one generation to another is a bit of a disappointment. Again, is that a deal breaker? Not necessarily, because the processor itself is not bad. It does get the job done and still makes this phone a really good value, but it is always nice to see innovations when it comes to that particular part of a smartphone. I do appreciate though that we are getting a larger battery, and then the battery does recharge even faster. Also having stereo audio with the Nord N30 5G is a very solid upgrade as well, and having that larger display at 120 Hz refresh rate is another nice improvement. So it is kind of hard to say which one to go for. I think another thing to consider too is that you are getting a newer version of Android with the N30 5G. I don't think the N20 is going to get any further updates beyond Android 12, whereas since the Nord N30 ships with Android 13, this phone certainly will be getting Android 14 at some point. So if you are looking for a newer version of Android, then I suppose you really only have one option here out of these two. So just know that if you have a Nord N20 5G right now, I wouldn't necessarily say that going to the N30 is going to be necessarily that much of a worthwhile upgrade. You might be better off waiting until the N40 next year, but most importantly, I'm really curious to know what you think. Are you happy with the improvements that we're getting with the new generation of this device, or do you feel like they should have done a bit more? Definitely let me know in the comment section below. But this concludes my comparison of the OnePlus Nord N30 5G versus the OnePlus Nord N20 5G. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.